Okay, that was fairly painless once we made ourselves enough room to work with. See, I've got the new fitting on there. It doesn't screw in or locate positively this way, so it has a hex nut end in order to back up when you're tightening the hydraulic line. I went ahead and put the two together before I pinned it in the master cylinder, just so I didn't have to try and get both my hands in there and with the backup and trying to tighten it. So it's on there. Now we'll proceed with putting the booster back in and then bolting up the master cylinder, and then we'll slide back underneath again and continue with installing the transmission. As I mentioned before, the transmission that I'm swapping into the Firebird is actually not a direct swap, so I had to bring my drive shaft in to get shortened by 2 3/4 inches in order to bolt up again once the transmission's in there. And then once they got a hold of the transmission at the rear end shop, they cut into it, and I guess a lot of these drive shafts, this one's a 3-inch and the stalker is, I think, like 2 3/4, but the yoke ends don't necessarily have they aren't a slip fit to slip into the tube and then to have that bead welded on there. So they're just kind of a butt weld, and it's not necessarily the strongest connection. So I opted for them to cut me a whole new drive shaft with new ends. The slip yoke is a reuse, but this will be a little bit stronger than the stock piece, and then hopefully when the time comes to put in the Strange S60 rear end, I'll be able to, hopefully, if anything, it is or forces me to cut a little bit off of this drive shaft here. Otherwise, if it needs a longer drive shaft, I'm going to have to end up having them cut this bit out and put a longer tube in there. But this is our replacement piece, and let's throw it in the car. Okay, so we got our transmission all bolted up and our new cross member in place. We got the new torque arm in there also. One disappointing detail is that I think the motor is the motor mounts are bolted up to where it's pulling the engine off to the passenger side. So I need to pull this back in order to get the bolt in the transmission mount. But our torque arm is going to interfere with that. And I think most of the reason for that is that this the cast-in transmission mount is kind of a dual pattern deal, so it's wider than the stock pad that this mount would go to. So we've got 2 bolts in here, but there's a second set of bolts or bolt holes that are outboard of that, so it makes the whole pad wider. because I don't really want to mess with it. I think I'm gonna get my saws all out and just kind of cut off at an angle enough to clearance this torque arm end enough to pull this tail shaft back to where the shift tower is centered in the opening in the transmission tunnel there. So a little bit of hacking, butchery, but it won't affect any kind of strength in the transmission itself. One other interesting detail that I didn't notice when I first pulled the drive shaft out, but you can see these, this is the, with the emergency brake linkage, you can see this damage where it's been hammered, and I think, I'm pretty sure that that was from the drive shaft. It's this car set pretty low when I bought it, and it looks good, but I think this being that low when it would going across bumps and whatnot, when it would bottom out on the axle, the drive shaft is actually hitting this bracket here. I'm going to bring the rear end up just a little bit from where it used to be, but hopefully with that extra diameter on the drive shaft, I won't be adversely, well, adding to the damage that is being done to this bracket here. And it's only in this one place. So we'll see. So as I mentioned before, our new T56 Magnum shift tower is actually 3 inches towards the front compared to the original T56. So our old boot, which did a fine job back then, just is going to be a little bit off. I could pull it around and get it over the shifter, but it's never really going to form much of a seal, and that's basically all it does, is keeping rain and road grime from blowing up in your face at speed and whatnot. So what I have devised is it's just a tire inner tube. I got a little cut here. For the shifter tower, I'll probably try to get it down below this first little bellows on the boot that's right here, just to give us a little better seal. And then we'll tuck it in underneath the carpet. And I've cut myself a couple pieces of flat bar and drilled them so that I can secure it front and rear, left and right. So we'll get into that and see how it turns out.